phone hit the floor there. Okay.
That would be a bad thing to lose a piece early.
Okay.
If it comes back empty, I'll have it sell. That's okay. Help yourself. Dump it in your purse. Bring Ziploc bags next time, son.
I have mine.
Oh, you know you do too. Aren't they good?
Yeah, thank you,
A
sir.
little bit of caramel in them. I was glad he didn't make them. Although if you did, you put it in the way for the things.
Thank you.
How are you? We handled that thing.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it didn't make sense. Did it make sense to you? It was an extraordinary thing. Shouldn't have moved over to somebody else's jurisdictional boundaries and try to have say. I mean, you go through due process. And that's what they did. You know, every meeting went through their process. I saw the explanation. Right. Okay, good. Steve to chair this.
Well, when you get through, you will.
Yeah, okay. Is he in the convention?
No idea where he is.
Okay.
I think we got a message to be there. And he'll be here when he gets there.
Things going well for you?
Oh, yes. I only have 3 places to be this morning.
Well, we're a little behind, but we're getting close. You know, our program, we got it pretty good.
Are you in one? Will that mess anything up in here?
Just like always, I cross over and
That's
do
right.
nuts.
Yep, and then, well, the good thing about it, they don't send us as many bills as we send them.
That's exactly right. You know, we dump friends and stuff, so they just kill it.
We'll have, God willing.
Chairman was good.
Yeah, I've got appropriation.
Good morning.
How are you?
Hi, Chip. Nice to see you.
Life good?
Yeah, I'm gonna sit.
Well, that's okay.
I don't know if I've got to go. I'm gonna ask Cliff at appropriation summit if I need to be there.
Yeah, when it came out,
Russ, I'm in Rocky.
I'll be there, but anyway,
Oh, security.
they ain't gonna do that.
Okay,
I
good.
told those guys, I said, if you're gonna talk,
Yes.
talk after. So you're not gonna touch it.
Who's carrying it on the Senate side?
John Edwards.
John's got.
I just talked to him about
Did
saying.
you? Okay, good. Yeah, well, I'll present it today if they want me to be be there, I'll be there, but I'm gonna ask Cliff at
That's at 2
appropriation.
o'clock, right?
I've got appropriation capital outlay with Cliff, he chairs the full committee.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask him if he wants me there.
They have a lot of other things to do.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Latrice, how you doing?
Why didn't you wear some red today for school funding?
Right?
Good to see you. You doing well?
Okay, all right.
Good, good.
Okay, good. Sounds good. All right, I'm gonna try to find a seat here. Yeah. Nice to see you too.
Good, Jeff. How you doing, man?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
You all right?
Sir, I'm doing well.
It's good.
Doing good.
You ever met Francis Hospital?
I don't think I have. And your name?
Francis Hudson.
Okay, pleasure to meet you.
See you also.
Yes, sir.
Working hard, I see. You didn't get with me Thursday.
Morning.
You didn't get with me
How you getting along? Not too bad. Good.
Might be thinking Foxy will be good.
You know, you're not the first person to suggest that.
Well, but I'll just share what it costs.
How you doing? Warren, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you. Okay, got distracted.
I'm gonna start using that. I like it.
The bill was explained to him. He put it in the book. When it went to full committee, don't ask him to make it explain first. So it's stated in the
Huh? I'm good, how are you?
that taught me a lesson. Sure does a good when Moss was speaking for a tie, uncontested bill that went out, voted through and applied, much like the Senate.
No. I'm not saying this.
After the first session of doing that, there were some things.
How you doing this morning?
Busy morning, lots going on.
Busy weekend, right?
Oh, there was no rest at all.
Yeah. I worked the whole time.
So it slowed up the process.
The thing we have to look forward to is knowing that there is an end.
Yes, there is. A couple of weeks will be sort of an end, but then let's get to March, right?
That's right, that's good.
That's the key.
We'll get there.
So did Jameson talk to you about that eviction diversion bill? And okay, so Christie believes that there ought to be one amendment. I believe there ought to be a different amendment, and she's happy if the bill stays exactly the way it is, and so am I. So we're asking you to strike the bill.
What? Okay.
And she thinks that the current language in the enactment clause doesn't really protect tenants the way she thought it did, and she wanted to rewrite it into something else. Which
Do you interpret it that way?
No, I don't. I interpreted that if you have ever been in a right of redemption
Right.
prior to July 1 of this year,
Yeah.
then you can't participate in the eviction diversion program. But, and what we proposed was, just to eliminate the enactment clause. I think that would have been better. But Christie went off and said, well, we want to write other eviction diversion programs. Christie, it has nothing to do
Absolutely
with
not.
this enactment clause. Well, there might be other. I said, there can't be. Because
I mean, the question then becomes, I can go talk to Bova, see how he interprets it, and see what my votes are, or just strike it. I mean,
I think she and I have got so many different irons in the fire on so many different things
okay,
that I think if we just strike it, then we're,
no problem.
yeah.
Okay.
And so that's her interpretation, is that there's apparently legal aid interpretation too that won't affect it at all. It's like, okay, well then, all right.
Sure. Okay.
We'll just leave it the way it is.
All right.
Research.
Heard you loud and clear.
This the other day, going back over some
So, but they,
bills I'd introduced.
Jameis has been in all those trials between Christy and I. We talked about it twice this past week, and she says, I just don't read the way you read it. I said, okay, well, we were doing it to protect tenants, and if you don't feel that they need that protection, then okay.
Right. Then that's basically what you're saying.
That's right.
Okay.
That should.
Everything people want to do.
Always about perspective.
Well, no, something little like that.
Right.
Corporations.
Good morning.
Got this? Yeah, I got this one. How are you?
Sometimes it's as good as it gets.
Steve told me this morning he had to present at another committee at 8 o'clock. And he would be here as soon as he got done. But this is the time of the legislative process when all that starts to happen. One
Yeah.
person who, everybody, put people away. Fortunately, Joe just got my bills this morning, the solar tax bills.
Ah.
And we're going to die for the day on those
Okay.
because we're working on language. And it's,
I just wanna make sure we help
trying to, it's like anything else, everybody's so busy.
Right.
And it's hard to get their attention to something when you finally get their attention, particularly with legislative services being as behind as it is, then it's like, hey,
Right.
you know, they go by for the day and I'll make sure that all the things get drafted, get the legislative services and everything else. I don't,
Man, it's just been so crazy getting
it's
just
nuts.
the amendments prepared and then getting them in front of people and then you have this, getting that revised. I mean, it's really bad.
So what I try to do, you know what I do, I try to get all those amendments written myself. and
Yes.
get everything
Make it
on.
easier to just
Exactly. Put
in
it
hand.
and then make sure that all the stakeholders see the amendments
Right.
ahead of time. And so I can do that as opposed to
trying to do it during committee,
during committee or the people who submit the legislative services wait for them to get back, and then
which is also
you
insane.
try to run with those amendments, and then you have to amend those.
Right.
I just amend stuff on the fly when people are, you know, okay, well, I don't like this word, all right, let's change it less until do this, you know, that sort of stuff. All right, I'm doing my next draft, and then, all right, everybody okay with this draft?
Right.
It's been, you know, edited
Right.
6 or 8 times,
Right.
10 times, or 27 times in the case of Assistance Animal, right?
Right, right.
And then once it gets edited to a final point, everybody's, I've worn them out on it. And that's what happens sometimes. It's just deal fatigue.
Oh, I know.
People get tired of editing.
They don't want to deal with it.
No.
Got in 8:30, so thought they might. What time does this meeting start? What was something I thought?
It's supposed to start. I think Alfonso said Steve's presenting somewhere down the hall. Just gotta make sure ours goes by. Is that local government? Also, all the same time.
Not here when I get back.
I see. Hey, Bobby. How you doing?
So what's new in your world?
I just thought Hey, good. Nice to see you. How you doing? Good. Yes. He told me.
Father wants to make sure well, it starts at 9.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
She'll be taking cameras and possibly I've worked on that all week.
Yeah.
I think I've got them in my position. Except for the lights.
Once we do that, this session.
Yeah. I've got Jay Jones's 2 Steve's got one.
Oh, Jones.
Because I've got bids to those. I've got a couple of restructuring appreciate it. Where are you? In theory, like 10 or something. Steve, somewhere else.
There's a lot going on today. We've got like 4 committees to be in this afternoon, kind of depending on when the House and Senate adjourn.
Right.
When's that?
Subcommittees. Many of them have to do at the same time. Have to be here.
Yeah.
Put your finger on the dike and get one place.
It's been a fun process to learn.
Yeah, it is a fun process.
Everybody's like, you did this in DC, it's kind of the same. 2-year session versus a 2-year session.
Yeah.
If we needed an amendment up there, we had like a month before the committee met.
Right.
You know,
It's not like that here.
yeah, a day, maybe an hour.
An hour, maybe an hour.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Good morning to you. After today, I don't
Yes, sir.
It's not even they all different. That is part of
Yeah, kind of like, average tenure of a university president. Oh, 7 years, I think it's less than that now.
You'll be glad to hear that he's on his way. Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
How we doing in there?
Good to see you. David, you doing all right? Good.
He's here.
Make that choice, right?
All right, good morning, everybody. I apologize for the delay. It's kind of a domino effect this morning. We're all supposed to be in everybody else's committees, so we're busy playing catch up. First bill this morning, I believe, is Delegate Bell.
Chair, good morning. This is a second act for a bill. So this was the bill that would have a de minimis exception for prepared meals at farmers markets, where you already have a exemption for the retail tax for the eggs and food. This would be for a coffee vendor who prepares the food that she sells, and that's done under the meals tax. And you said, go talk to people and get back to us. So I've done so. I did speak to in courts we call her their Uber chairs, the full chair, the full committee. She said, keep it simple, keep it like other things. So we talked about something other than $2,500 tied to income. That's how you do the retail tax. So we kept it at $2,500 tax. You also said, what if it's got multiple counties? Staff was kind enough to say that the income should be the income across counties. If you're at 4 farmers markets, it should cover all 4, not just the one. And then otherwise, we talked about how to report it. And apparently for small amounts, it's a trust but verify system where the counties, you report it in, and then they can audit you, although the counties we talked to did say it's unlikely that they will audit often or frequently someone at this stuff was just too small an amount. It just from the testimony, because I think everyone but Delegate Hudson was here, but just what she said was not the money at all, it's just having to account for, write, bookkeep a $2.13 check to pay for the meal preparation for really small vendors that cost her much more than either she's making or that the county is raising for the money. So I think it leaves you with a policy decision about whether you want to have a small exemption for very small providers at farmers markets.
Question, Dave.
I'm sorry, then there's a substitute. And the line amendment to clarify that it covers multiple places. Is that what the question you all had?
So the amendment just makes it clear that the $2,500 cap applies to sales anywhere, not just in the county or locality imposed with tax.
It's not all counties have the tax, and it's imposed by the locality, county by county.
Is there a motion on the amendment?
So,
Second.
All right. Amendment was moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, adopted.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Bay, about, two things. Did I hear you spoken to Chairman Watts about this?
I did.
Okay.
I was speaking for her and finished
Okay,
here.
great, welcome. We haven't really solved the issue of how you know what someone's annual is. We're just gonna sort of hope it works out at these small levels. Is that sort of the?
And we're trying to track, that's the exact language word for word in the retail tax section. So to visualize this, you have 2 different people at farmers markets. One does coffee, one's free. One does coffee and eggs, and one does just eggs. The eggs is already covered in both places. This would cover the prepared food, because that's a different tax. That's the prepared meals tax,
Right.
not just the retail tax. And the thought was keeping it the same book. This is a bookkeeping issue, not a money issue. Is to try to keep the same bookkeeping so they don't have to have a separate, gross receipts over here and income over there. So it's the same setup they use for retail.
I'm looking at my chairman who keeps going like this, so that's good enough.
Just trying to keep it simple.
Other questions?
You picked a good ally.
Anyone here to speak in support of the bill? Sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Andrew Smith with the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation, and we support this. It will help some of our smaller farmers. An example of this, I had a producer this year that does prepared salads, whereas the same salad sold in a grocery store would not be subject to the meals tax, but because they're doing a small scale, we appreciate your support.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in support of the bill? Any opposed?
Move to approve. Go ahead.
Is there a motion to report? Do you have a question on the bill?
I did have a question on
Yes,
the
sir.
bill. I'm still a little bit concerned, my viewpoint of the seller's annual income, this might be an attorney, there might be a definition for what income is from an attorney standpoint, from an accountant standpoint. I think of revenue as sales. I think of income as revenue minus expenses. I mentioned at the last time that it would make me feel better if annual income was replaced with revenue or sales, one of those two words, and that wasn't done in this bill. I wonder if there was a legal reason that I don't understand for that.
Well, I think the main reason was just to keep the language the same as the sales tax exemption for vegetable sellers. So that was something that we considered, but I think out of simplicity, we stopped it for the same language.
So why, if, again, I'm not the attorney side, but, you know, I sell $40,000 worth of coffee, and I only make $1,000 or I lose, my income is negative. Why would I not be covered by the exemption? Because my income is under $2,500.
You would be, and it's in the same way that the retail tax, we're trying to keep it the same. Now, you all have made a policy decision, I'm not on this committee, to set it up as an income floor for the retail sales. I don't know why.
I don't know anything about that.
I'm just, it's in, Madam Chair can say, but it's in a different code section.
Mr. Chairman,
Go Mark.
Mr. Chairman, what I would offer is that's a very sound observation from, and consistency right now is what we need to go with, but I believe that next year, looking at the code and making sure that these terms are the same, but that we don't end up confusing another area by using a different term in this, I think it would be prudent.
Other questions? Delegate Murphy, if you got a motion. As amended. Yeah. The motion is to report as amended. Cast your vote. Thank you. Close the roll. The bill reports 8-1, and we thank you, Delegate Bell.
Sure.
Delegate Sol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the people in the room. I'm jumping the line here a little bit, so because like the chairman, I have a couple other places I need to be. I'm hoping that our bill should be non-controversial. There is a substitute that will pass around. The substitute simply, with the work of a lot of big lawyers over the last days, substitute streamlines and simplifies what it is we are trying to accomplish. This is a bill only a bunch of real estate transaction lawyers could love. It has to do with deeds of trust relating to multi-jurisdictional credit facilities and the value that the Virginia property relative to the value of all the property securing the facility has, and what happens if there is a subsequent change to that security. It's my understanding, this is not my area of the law, but it's my understanding that there's been uniformity as to how that's treated around the Commonwealth, but at least one clerk in the Commonwealth has now thrown that uniformity into uncertainty by taking a different position. So this clarifies that if there's a modification of a prior deed of trust, and what should be exempted from recordation tax in any subsequent right. If the prior instrument secures the entire amount of the credit facility, the recordation tax on the modification is based on an increased amount of the credit facility allocated in proportion to the value of the Virginia property relative to the value of all property then securing the facility. If it secures less than the entire amount of the credit facility, the recordation tax on the mod is based only on the amount of any increase in the amount secured, or is exempt if there's no increase in the amount secured. So I'm sure you all understood that perfectly.
Every word.
It is, as I understand it, what this bill would do is essentially clarify that the way it's been being done around the Commonwealth for years is the way it should be done and removes any uncertainty in that regard. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
All right. motion on the, is it amendment or substitute?
Substitute.
All right, amendment on this, motion on the substitute. Okay. All right, the motion is to, is seconded is to, accept the substitute. All in favor? Aye. All right, delegates all. Any further comments?
I have no further idea. I have a friend here to help me unless, of course, there are questions from the,
All right, questions from the committee? All right, hearing none, speaking in favor of the bill.
Jeff Palmer on behalf of the Virginia Bar Association. Our real estate section worked on the substitute of the bill. Understand some of the issues are localized that we're trying to deal with. So the substitute really tries to hone in on that one issue without changing how recordation taxes are recorded across the Commonwealth. So with that, we were happy to work on the substitute. Thank you.
Questions? Hearing none. Anyone else in favor of the bill? Anyone opposing the bill? All right, is there a motion?
Move the report.
Second.
Motion is to report with substitute in a second. Open the roll. And we close the roll 9-0. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Delegate Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill was brought to me by the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies, representing all the local wastewater treatment plants or agencies statewide. By way of background, as a political subdivision, these agencies don't pay sales taxes when directly purchasing wastewater equipment or other goods themselves. But when they hire contractors to build, say, the Chesapeake Bay nutrient upgrades or other wastewater projects, their contractors rely on the existing certified pollution control equipment tax exemption. JLARC's June of last year report on data center manufacturing incentives discussed how this long-standing exemption is implemented. It was enacted in 1972. It exempts purchases of property and equipment used primarily to abate or prevent air and water pollution. The property or equipment had to be certified by the appropriate state agency to be eligible for the exemption. As it turns out, within the water division of DEQ that deals mostly with local government projects, it has been the long-standing practice to certify municipal projects beforehand or prospectively. This has been the regular practice actually going on for 30 years. I get it. I'll stand up. No longer need work. On November 18th actually of last year, the DEQ Water Division updated its tax exemption guidance to align it with the retroactive certification approach using the DEQ's Air Division. In that same JLARC report from June of last year, several stakeholders said that requiring that pollution control equipment be installed or that the facility be built before certification is really just overly burdensome as it relates to wastewater treatment plants. It is not clear also whether or not it was our intent in the General Assembly to require that the pollution control equipment be in place before companies could receive certification for the use of the sales tax exemption. The JLARC report option would retain that I'd like to. It was part of one of their recommendations in the report last year was to retain long-standing DEQ Water Division approach to the local government's projects, like to do it prospectively, like what we've done with the Chesapeake Bay upgrades and other municipal projects that you've heard about, the Alexandria Combined Sewer Overflow project, the HRSD SWIFT potable water injection program. We're doing this a lot in Virginia, and it's important that we continue to enable these programs to use this process. So I think retaining this upfront certification is particularly important for these municipal projects to make them work as intended. There's 4 reasons. Upfront certification avoids long-term tracking and retrospective application procedures which are overly burdensome for large-scale, long-term projects that help our environment. 2, upfront certification gives contractors the certainty that they need to factor into the savings and bid prices, and by so doing it actually makes things easier for ratepayers. 3, the Commonwealth is making Water Quality Improvement Fund grants and VRA loans for these projects that actually pass the savings on to the state treasury as well. And then 4, upfront certification also avoids financing complications where localities borrow more money and have unspent bond proceeds left over at the end of the process once the exemption is finally approved and the sales tax recovered. So this bill is actually pretty simple. It just makes it so that we maintain the status quo about how these water pollution pollution control tax exemptions have been done for over 30 years in Virginia up until just 2 months ago. It was literally changed was made 2 months ago. So I hope it'll be the will of the committee to report the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Questions for the patron? All right, hearing none, anyone speaking in favor of the bill? Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chris Pomeroy from Aqua Law, and I represent the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies. As the patron mentioned, this exemption has been used for decades now until November of this past year. Has been very helpful and important to the financing process for these particularly complex wastewater treatment upgrades that take typically several years to construct in our larger communities and still a long period of time in communities all across the state. So it would be the subcommittee's pleasure to see that this provision be retained. That would continue the benefit that's worked very well for the Commonwealth and for the construction of these significant public projects for many, many years running now. We'd appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in favor of the bill? Anyone opposed to the bill? All right, is there a motion?
Move to report.
Second.
The motion is to report with the sign. Open the roll. Lopez, you report 10-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A couple of housekeeping things before we move on. There are some requests to take a number of bills by. I am asked to remind everyone that there is one docket of the subcommittee left. So if your bill goes by for the day today, we cannot guarantee that we will be able to act on it before crossover. So with that admonition, it's my understanding that Delegate Jones asked to take 1131 by for the day. Is there a motion? All in favor? All right, 1131 is by for the day. Similar request with Delegate Jones. 1434, is there a motion to take by for the day?
Second.
All right, all in favor? 1434 by for the day. Delegate McQuinn, 1520, asked to strike. That is recorded vote. All right, the motion then is to strike 1520 on a recorded vote. And 1520 is struck from the docket. Moving along. Delegate Adams. You have 1021?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Heritage, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present House Bill 1021 to you. It provides for the purposes of local personal property tax exemptions that farm machinery includes any machinery designed for the planting, production, or harvesting of agricultural products, but specifically related to silvicultural and logging products. And this is a bill that would incentivize that industry, the logging industry, which is very important in rural jurisdictions like my own. It is supported by the Virginia Forestry Association, Virginia Log Association, Virginia Farm Bureau, and also by VACO, who appreciates the opportunity to clarify this code section. There is a substitute, and I would ask if one of you would move the substitute.
Second.
All right, the motion second with the second to receive the substitute. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
And so, Chairman and members of the committee, as you can see, the substitute accomplishes this objective by amending Virginia Code Section 58.1-3505 by adding number 14, which says farm machinery and farm implements other than the farm machinery and farm implements described in 8 and 10 above, which shall include equipment and machinery used for forest harvesting and silvicultural activities. The rest of the bill essentially just makes the other provisions consistent with this substantive change.
Questions for the patron?
Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Adams. I'm looking through Section 10 of the existing code, and it says farm machinery designed solely for the planting, production, or harvesting of a single product or commodity. Would trees not be a single product?
Well, that's a very good question, Delegate Carter. I appreciate that. That has been the argument used by members of the forestry industry, as I understand it, without success. That it's not, and there's some specific reasons for that, I think, why that's not being considered by the commissioners. I do have someone from the Log Association and Farm Bureau who can speak to that specifically.
Morning, sir.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, welcome, or thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Virginia loggers across the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'll try to answer your questions to the best of our ability, and I may not actually know the answers. I have to defer to more expertise than me. But House Bill 1021 allows us the opportunity to legally, statutorily place the forest harvesting or silviculture clearly with this similarities to farming and agriculture. Both are production of plants and crops. You might just say that we together, and we fall under the Secretary of Ag and Forestry, we are producing the fiber and the food for much of our country and much of the world. So that is a strong connection between them. And like farming, many of our logging or forest harvesting are family members. They are people who have worked most of their lives or have had generations before them who works in this business. They're small family owned, and they expect to pass that business on to their future generations if they can keep their young people in the area and do so. I think the first step, like farming, is our process is to harvest the trees and then transport them to the mills. This is an essential part of what we do. That's the sector that I represent. Every generation expects for that tradition to be passed on to the next generation. And to mention some of the similarities about farming and our silviculture or forest harvesting, give it, for instance, weather. Weather can be really to stop your production or slow your production down in our fields. Unlike farming, our forestry part is sort of a continuous harvesting, because Virginia is based on your good vision and wisdom many, many decades ago, sought to have a reforestation program, sought to understand the value of forest, and that's the real key. So we have forests now that are producing 2 times what we are actually harvesting, and that's a fact that is given to us through studies by the U.S. Forest Service and the Virginia Department of Forestry. And yet, we're continually harvesting every day. So it's an annual harvest for most farmers. It's a continuous harvest for us. Our equipment, too, is like farming. I cannot use it for much of anything else. I can't use it to clear a site for a home or build a road. It is strictly used for farming or for forest harvesting. So when things happen that stop that production, that means that family is not producing. Another obstacle for us is just the daily volatility in our markets. It's a constant quota production relationship that's going on. And it also has a big challenge to the sustainability of our entire forest or to our businesses. But by the end of the calendar year, there comes one real big difference. All of our forestry family owners, forest harvesting, are subject to a machinery and tools tax or a personal property tax. And it's a huge bite for our small family-owned businesses. So in the policy that has been given and guided down to localities, they had the option to exempt in whole or part of the farm machinery. And so what this bill would do is actually place that into that same category and give the county or the locality the option to exempt in whole or part the forest harvesting equipment. This would mean a tremendous difference and big benefit to our family-owned forest harvesting businesses. I ask for your consideration. I hope you will support the bill.
Thank you, sir. Questions for the speaker? All right. Hearing none. Other folks in support of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Andrew Smith of Virginia Farm Bureau Federation, and we do support the bill. And I'll just mainly focus on the delegate's question. We had concerns with the bill as introduced because it did lump what we're proposing in category 10 to treat it like other that. And the concern we had, because we did want to make it permissive for the counties and not force them to decide whether they exempt, all or none, as far as harvesting equipment. This is a new concept to include forest harvesting equipment in this, and so if they have cotton harvesters throughout the county and they didn't want to exempt the forest part of it, they don't have the luxury of separating one item in that list, items within that from the others. They can select from that list, not divide within one of them. So we asked that it be an individual item that they could select from and not be lumped into the others. So we do ask for your consideration and support. Thank you.
Sir. Other folks in support of the bill?
Good morning, members of the committee. Beck Stanley for the Virginia Agribusiness Council. We support this legislation.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Katie Holbush with the Virginia Forestry Association, and we also support this legislation, and also Susan Stewart with the Virginia Forest Products Association also asked me to give you her support for the bill as well this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Joe Lurch, Virginia Association of Counties, and support the legislation.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, members of the committee, that we know that this is a beginning. When this is approved, there will be a lot more work for each of our family members and my VLA to go out and work with each county and to educate them on the similarities. So thank you again for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anyone in opposition to the bill? All right. Hearing none. Sir, Delegate Sullivan.
Speaking of the bill briefly.
Sir.
I just want to tell Delegate Adams and the folks that are here to support you, I love bills like this. I love voting on them. Because then my constituents asked about them and someone was talking about education. In my neck of the woods, if I ask people to name the top 3 industries in Virginia, too few of them will include agriculture and forestry. And we all know that ag and forestry are in the top 3 industries in Virginia. So this is a great educational opportunity for me to go back to Northern Virginia and tell people why we're doing these things for other parts of the state that are crucial to our economy. So thank you for bringing this.
Thank you. Love those words.
Move to report.
All right. The motion then is to report. Second. This comes from the second. Close. All right. Report's 8-0.
Thank you.
All right, Delegate LaRock, 679 and 17.
When you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
679, Delegate LaRock.
Mr. Chairman, I hope the committee will view this as a bit of a house cleaning bill. Let's take a little bit of exploration though, and I'll jump into the timeline. In 2003, when the General Assembly completed a several-year process amending the Virginia Constitution, as you know, that takes passage of a resolution twice and a vote of referendum. And that action was to abolish the practice of issuing tax exemptions at the state level. There's 2 types of tax exemptions, and perhaps council could offer a better description or explanation than I, but there are by designation. Those are designated in code, and they would include churches, I think is probably the most obvious, and non-designation are ones that are just put in motion when a locality, or were prior to 2003, put in motion by locality requesting the legislature to issue a tax exemption to different nonprofit organizations who met certain criteria. So that was 2003. We're going to jump back in time from there. In 1995, I think the legislature made it clear that those were not intended to be permanent, and best evidence of that is that there's a procedure put in process whereby those exemptions could be revoked. I brought you this bill at the request of Frederick County, Virginia. This has been a priority for them for a number
exists an entity by the name of Westminster Canterbury that perhaps at the time the credit was issued at the request of Frederick County government, they did meet the criteria as spelled out in code, that they would be providing a service to the community, among other things. But in the process that is spelled out in code, these are to be reviewed every 3 years. Frederick County has done that, reinstates most all of the exemptions, with the exception of Westminster Canterbury, has come to the conclusion that they no longer qualify. Westminster Canterbury is a, well, I call it a cash cow for a nonprofit. It is, by all standards, I think, a luxury community, and that's wonderful. That millionaires can retire in comfort if they hand over a good portion of their wealth to Westminster Canterbury. And I've just got a couple color exhibits because pictures are sitting there. Communicate things effectively. These are taken from brochures. I only have a couple copies of brochures, but it is a luxury facility by any standard. So Frederick County, again, has come to the conclusion that this entity is no longer serving the public good, in as much as only millionaires are allowed into the community. So the tax exemption again is what we're talking about here. Again, wonderful that some people can live in luxury and can afford to do that. But I brought this bill, a similar bill, not the one you have before you, a couple times to the legislature, at the request of Frederick County, asking that we utilize the process set forth in the law to revoke this. And for whatever reason, that I guess partly because it's lobbied heavily. Westminster Canterbury has plenty of money to hire lobbyists. I think the first year I brought this forward, they had about $5.2 million in investment income. Not quite as good this year. I think they make about $185,000 a month now, just on investment income. So that's not ordinary income. That's just on whatever they, huge cash reserves they've set aside, making lots of money. I think as of last year, they had avoided paying about $4.some million in taxes over the approximate 30-year life of the exemption, probably approaching the total cost of the original capital investment that they made. So I'll leave some time for questions, but what this actually does is when one entity is not paying their fair share, there's a couple of things that are put into it, taken out of balance. One is there's other competing luxury retirement communities in the community who don't have the benefit of the tax exemption. They're paying a significant amount of tax, certainly way more than Westminster Canterbury, and they're very profitable still. So there's no any pretense that this is a tax exemption that is necessary for Westminster Canterbury to exist is just disproven by others thriving and prospering without it. What I think has caused me to put the amount of time I have in this, I think to hopefully prompt the legislature to act, is that when one entity doesn't pay their fair share, the rest of the property owners pay more. So when I am out and about in Frederick County, and particularly in times when the economy isn't so good, occasionally you'll see a foreclosure sign. That means that somebody couldn't pay their property taxes, perhaps, and they lost their home. So we have a very different situation. The treatment of these individuals is a severe penalty, and those who live in the luxury community, although they have a sort of an ownership agreement, they benefit from a tax exemption where some people don't pay property taxes. So that's the inequity, because the reason I call this a house cleaning issue is, the question is before us, how to correct this? And what we're proposing is that because the legislature in 2003 got out of the business of these, I think perhaps that would have been a more ideal time to have acted on those outstanding exemptions and disqualified them or sunset them. What they did do is give local governments the ability to act to extend those that they felt were of benefit to the community. Frederick County has passed a resolution that would give all but Westminster Canterbury extensions of their tax exemption. Other local governments could do likewise. So because we don't want to pull the rug out from anybody, we'd like to kind of correct this housekeeping issue. We proposed that if this were to pass the legislature, it would have a 5-year sunset. So that would give local governments plenty of time to look over the exemptions that they have on their books, determine which ones they feel are still of benefit to the community, and perhaps pass a resolution that would provide the security for the organizations that they feel qualified of knowing that their tax exemption would not be revoked, and those who don't, for example, yacht clubs or other entities that clearly are outside it, would then expect that their tax exemption would be revoked. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Doug. Questions? Doug O'Rourke.
Just speaking to the measure and give a little background, just full understanding of the subcommittee. Prior to '03, every year in the General Assembly, we had a boatload of bills specifically requesting an exemption for a specific entity in local government. They were never considered unless, one, they had met certain criteria we established, and one of those being, two, a local government resolution requesting it. And it became rather cumbersome, we thought, in the legislative process, because when we got the data, we had to have a subcommittee meeting, we rubber stamped them, because it's like, you asked for it, we'll give it to you, because it's a local tax exemption. In '03, we changed that, delegating that authority entirely to local government, but because the legislature had approved the previous exemptions, at the request of local government, we felt it would be unfair to change the rules after the game had been ongoing. Since then, I'm not aware of any entity other than Westminster Canterbury where local government has come in requesting to rescind their previous actions. So just to give that background as to kind of why we are where we are, and that's why we're not getting exemption bills in the General Assembly anymore, because in '03 we changed the process and let local government make that call, and so that's why we are. The difference, if I may, Delegate LaRocque, in this measure compared to ones in past years, it was pretty specific to Westminster, Canterbury, and Frederick County. Whereas if I understand this measure, every jurisdiction in the state that has extended these from '03 back would now have to go back and re-effect that exemption that they requested of us prior to '03. Is that correct?
They would likely do that.
I'm saying
That
yes.
doesn't compel them or require them to do that, but that's likely how it would play out.
Otherwise, that entity would no longer have the exemption. It would have to be proactive on local government to do so.
The default is that it would expire.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking through the first enactment clause here, and you're striking a bunch of language from the code. It says the local governing body may submit to the General Assembly a list of those organizations whose property is designated as tax exempt, which the local governing body wants to remove from its exempt property list. Legislation including such a list must be introduced no later than the first calendar day of any session of the General Assembly unless requested by the governor. And perhaps this is a question for the patron. If there's one particular entity that the county wishes to remove the exemption from, I'm wondering why we're changing this entirely and requiring action from potentially 138 different localities when there's a single entity in a single county that we're going after, and there's already a mechanism to remove it from the list.
Yeah, perhaps rely on counsel to explain the precise mechanics, but essentially, I'll add that there is a procedure in place, and I have conformed to that procedure request and executed a bill exactly as prescribed twice now, and the legislature has chosen not to act on that. It's clear, I think, that again, back in 1995, there was a procedure put in place to revoke these exemptions. So they were not intended to be permanent, I think, as perhaps the delegates' comments imply. It's really a failure of the legislature to act on this orderly process that was put forward to bring an end to what should have been a temporary exemption and effectively make it permanent by not acting on it.
Mark, is there anyone here speaking in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Tom Dick, the legislative liaison for Frederick County, and what Delegate LaRocque told you is correct. The broad way it's phrase now as opposed to specifically to Westminster Canterbury, every locality, any group that comes in right now, every locality considers requests for property tax exemptions, and they have that process now, and every 3 years they review that. So it's really not something new. They would just get the opportunity to review the ones who have the legislature enacted previously. And in fact, the Virginia Association of Counties is here, and I know maybe they could speak to that part, that question as well, because they have adopted language supporting legislation. But in Frederick County, 99% of the people in the county are never going to step foot into this facility, and it's a beautiful place, and people have done well and deserve to be there. But I had in 2017 they had 2.1 million in investment income alone for that 1 year. I should say, if with the extension, the amount of subsidy, if it goes out 5 years, then it would be over $4 million total of actual subsidy they received from the county. That money in this last year was about $193,000. They make a payment in lieu of taxes. The difference between that and what they would have paid is about $193,000 for the last year, so they could hire either deputy sheriffs, school teachers, firefighters with that money. And one of the problems with the fairness, it's not just that the burden goes throughout the county for that, but there are, since 2003, there have been 2 other retirement communities that have opened up and begun operations in the county. And one, Spring Arbor, is about half of Westminster Canterbury's size, but they pay more than twice as much as Westminster Canterbury does in taxes. And the village at Orchard Ridge is about twice as large, and they pay 12 times as much in taxes. So the county doesn't think those entities qualify for the exemption and won't extend it to them, but they can't remove the one that's there, because that process is spelled out. The General Assembly has to do that. And so our focus really is on addressing that issue. The county has taken action to pass resolutions supporting or renewing the exemption for every other entity that's in the county already. So if the bill was enacted, they would be protected. It would just be the one company that they think didn't no longer qualifies, and that's what we're trying to get at.
Thank you. Anyone else in favor of the bill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Katie Boyle with the Virginia Association of Counties. Excuse me, and we do support this bill. I think philosophically we believe that real estate taxes are a main staple of government revenues, and it should be a local decision whether or not to grant these exceptions. Thank you for your consideration.
Anyone speaking in opposition to the bill?
Good morning, I'm Dana Parsons, Vice President and Legislative Counsel with Leading Age Virginia, and we represent the not-for-profit continuum of aging services throughout Virginia. And this bill would have a devastating impact on all not-for-profits, and therefore we'd ask that you oppose it. Thank you.
Anyone else in opposition? Yes,
Good
ma'am.
morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I'm Nikki Robner. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. We are one of the many organizations that would be affected by this bill. We have 17 pages of other organizations that we can list for you if you haven't already seen that list. The only ones I'm authorized to speak on behalf of are my organization and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We both oppose this bill. We own property statewide. We have a property tax exemption that is statewide that was granted to us in 1984. And our understanding since 2003 was it was intended to be permanent. Of course, the General Assembly could revoke it if there was a policy reason to do so, but I submit there is no policy reason to do so here for my organization and for many others. So thank you for your consideration of this bill. We hope you will defeat it.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Emily Kerr. I represent Shannon, North Valley, Westminster, Canterbury, which Delegate LaRock has aimed at legislation that for the last couple of years. One thing that I would point out, building on what Nikki said, is that there is a way to undo this if this entity does not meet its original purpose for which the General Assembly put the tax exemption in. We are still a charitable organization. We have not lost that tax status. We still do a lot of good for the county and for the city. We got our tax exempt status back in 1986, and since then we have had a pilot agreement that goes to the county and to the city. And as part of this ongoing legislative battle, the General Assembly asked us, or your committee asked us in 2016 to try to sit down and make some sort of work out with the county. What we did, we hired some lawyers. We came up with a new payment in lieu of taxes plan that almost tripled
our payment to the city. And the city told us they had no interest in this, that they just would like to go back to the General Assembly and try to take away the tax exemption. So we feel like we're trying to negotiate in good faith with them, and we were not, it was not accepted. We still do a lot of work around the county for our for the dominant purpose test of being charitable. We do Meals on Wheels, we do free clinic, we do medical supplies, we have meeting spaces for entities. And as part of the reason that we have this tax exemption status in 2016 and 2017, we've invested over $15 million in expansion, both in the city and in the county, because our entity sits right on the line between the city and the county. So we've made a lot of decisions to increase our footprint and do other things that is invested in the county and brings them more money. And so we respectfully ask you, since we are still a charitable organization and there is no reason to take our tax exempt status away from us, so please defeat the bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
So your point is?
The current presenter mentioned that there was a method of reviewing or doing away with this exemption. Council, could you tell us what that is?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Poindexter, the local body is actually the struck language in this bill. The locality can apply to the General Assembly to revoke the designation of the named entity that was granted the exemption.
So apply to the General Assembly via legislation, or is there something else we do?
That's correct.
All right.
Require legislation.
Okay. That's what he's doing. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions for the speaker? Hearing none. Anyone else in opposition to the bill? All right. Is there a motion on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, can I have the last word?
Yes, sir.
The pretense that the greater good of the community is being served by an entity spending a little bit of the money that they've kept as a result of a tax exemption is I think, at best an exaggeration. But they do create some benefit for the community. And those who have commented, who have, just to the extent that I could process from the name of the entity, feel threatened by this, should not. The intent of taking this off the book, or out of the authority of the General Assembly, was to return it to local control, where they would evaluate if it's a free clinic, if it's an entity, a nature conservancy that does actually provide benefit to the community. There's little doubt in my mind that they would then exercise the authority that's been delegated back to them and reinstate the tax credit, as Frederick County has done with all but the one that no longer qualifies as being under the criteria that was put forth to issue that tax credit in the first place. So with that said, I hope that the community sees fit to move this forward and help rectify this inequity in this imbalance in taxes are being paid.
Took us off.
Have a motion.
Okay.
While I admire Delegate LaRocque's persistence, I move to lay this bill on the table.
Motion is to table and second. Delegate Hudson, do you have a vote? The table is for 10, I'm sorry. All right. Delegate Rock, 1728.
I'd like to say in contrast to that, which required a little bit of explanation, this is pretty much self-explanatory, I think. Mr. Chairman, what this proposes, members of the committee, is that localities would be enabled to pass an ordinance which would potentially exempt tolls paid from personal property tax, so car tax, otherwise known as car tax. The reasoning is that in parts of the Commonwealth, including many people I serve, that is a enormous burden. It is something that tolls are paid out of taxable income, and families that need to get back and forth to work have an enormous burden in addition to the other costs of living. So we would hope that we would consider, again, granting the local discretion to, by ordinance, exempt tolls up
Tilton Rock, is there a financial impact statement?
The impact would be an exemption of property taxes, so that is local money, and so I guess my understanding is that there would be no impact on the state because of that.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, you are. Thank you, sir. Right, okay. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Correct.
Right.
He's better prepared than I am.
It was in the packet. Thank you, sir.
It's out of order.
Yeah.
I was just.
Question, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill?
The question or speaking to the bill?
Speaking to the bill.
Speaking to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Barak, thank you for bringing this. As I'm sure anyone who's seen my votes on tolls knows, I'm quite philosophically opposed to the idea of toll roads. I feel that financing road construction with tolls is essentially just shoveling the bill off to the people who use that road when the General Assembly doesn't feel it necessary to pay for a road ourselves. However, my concern with this legislation is that the localities that would have the greatest incentive to do this are the localities that would likely least be able to afford this, because they'd be the localities where the most people are using these toll roads. And so, this seems to me like, if we were to enact this, it would essentially be the General Assembly pushing the cost of road construction off onto the commuters, and then coming back and saying, no, wait a minute, we don't actually want the commuters to pay this, we want the local governments to pay for this. When really, if the General Assembly wanted these roads constructed, we should have paid for them in the first place. And if we want toll relief, I feel that, we should take responsibility as a body and come back and have toll relief on our level, out of our budget, and not push this off the localities. So with that in mind, I intend to vote no on this.
Questions from the table? Yes.
Mr. Chair, speaking to the bill and perhaps a question, but really not a question, speaking to the bill, as Delegate Carter just said, and I'll say, you'll note on the impact statement, there is no impact to the state because the impact is to the locality. So this is just simply pushing one expense from the state to the localities who can bear it the least. And therefore I won't be supporting this.
All right. The questions for the table? Hearing none, anyone speaking in favor of the bill? Anyone speaking in opposition to the bill? All right. And, before we take the vote, let me just add my own comments to the bill if I can. Delegate Rock, I certainly applaud anyone's efforts to help minimize the impact of tolls in our localities. I probably know better than many people the damage that tolls create to localities. The problem with this bill, as I see it, is in localities like mine, you're simply doubling down on the damage. In other words, instead of having the state help to pay for its, what I would assert, fair share of transportation expenses and transportation facility infrastructure improvement, you're asking for localities to pay what they already cannot. And for that reason, I'll be joining my colleagues in opposing the bill. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, may I just
Of course, if you have the
ask
final
for,
word.
just to make sure the bill is understood, this is permissive. This is not requiring a locality to take action. Only enabling them to do so if they chose to provide some relief for the people who are burdened by the tolls. It's just that simple.
I understand.
Move the table, Mr. Chairman.
There's a motion to table and a second. Discussion on that. All right. The motion then is to table. Votes. Vote McNamara. Okay, we're all up. The motion, the bill is tabled 10-0. Thank you. Delegate
Chairman, members of
Austin,
the committee.
Delegate here.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring before you today House Bill 1327. It's a wind turbine tax rate. This bill is being brought on behalf of Botetourt County and Apex Clean Energy, who will be the developer of the wind turbine project on Rocky Ridge impose property tax on wind turbine equipment at a rate that exceeds the local real estate tax rate by up to 20 cents per 100 of assessed value. Under current law, property taxes on wind turbine equipment may exceed the real estate rate, but it cannot exceed the general personal property tax rate of the locality. Botetourt County has approved the first onshore wind turbine farm in Virginia. In Botetourt, the current real estate rate is 79 cents per 100, and the personal property tax rate is $2.71 per 100. Anchoring this rate as such will provide revenue stability for the locality, the supplier, and the consumer. Botetourt has worked with Apex Clean Energy, and they have determined this to be the best path forward. Are there any questions?
Questions from the subcommittee? Hearing none. All right. Anyone here speaking in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Preston Bryant on behalf of Apex Clean Energy, which is the developer of the project. You know, it's in the process of developing and planning and financing this project that we discovered that the tax code, there's never been a wind project developed in Virginia. The tax code needed to be updated a little bit to reflect the realities of these kinds of projects. And this bill would provide flexibility to counties while also providing reasonable assurance to investors who would have confidence in financing these projects. So we hope it's a favorable consideration. We're aware of no opposition to it.
Pretty good. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Christopher West representing Conservatives for Clean Energy. We support this legislation. The project in Botetourt is a huge opportunity both for the locality and the Commonwealth as a whole. The Commonwealth has agreed to purchase the power that is generated from the wind turbines, and so we hope that you all support this legislation.
Thank you. Ms. Manager.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, my name is Karina Bell. I'm representing Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and we are supportive of the legislation as it does drive forward our clean energy goals, which are very important because of the climate crisis that we face. And as colleagues on the side said, there is negligible onshore wind in the state of Virginia, so we're very excited to see this project proceed.
Thank you. Anyone else in favor of the bill? All right. Anyone speak in opposition? All right. Delegate Austin, nice work.
Thank you. Good project. $1 million in revenue to Botetourt County. So.
All right. Is there a motion?
Move the report.
All right. There was a motion and second to report. Everyone up. The bill report's 9-0. Thank you, Delegate Austin.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your work.
Delegate Ayers.
Just want to say in advance, if you could just do exactly what you did for them, that would be great.
We'd like you to stay with you, let's raise.
Delegate Davis, you're next. Delegate Cole follows. Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Before you is House Bill 755. 755 was introduced at the request of the city of Petersburg. It provides that in the city, blighted properties and derelict structures shall constitute a separate class of property for local taxation of real property, and would allow the city by ordinance to levy a tax on blighted properties and derelict structures at a rate that exceeds the general real property tax rate by 5% and 10% respectively. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the city of Petersburg is in the process of emerging financially. While the city is on the path to recovery, hundreds of residential properties have remained in substantial disrepair. The city currently has extremely limited resources to address the problem of unsafe, dilapidated structures that are found throughout the city. House Bill 755 states that any tax levied pursuant to such an ordinance shall be imposed upon a determination by the real estate assessor that a property constitutes as a blighted property or derelict structure. The bill also provides that in the city of Petersburg, delinquent tax lands may be sold 6 months after the locality has incurred abatement costs for buildings that have been condemned, constitute a nuisance, or are a derelict building, or are declared to be blighted. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, enabling the city to impose enhanced real property taxes upon blighted properties and derelict structures will encourage owners to repair their properties and abate these unsafe conditions. This will also provide additional revenue stream that the city may use to combat its housing crisis and promote development with further efforts by the city to emerge from this financial need. Lastly, the proposed amendments to the state code were endorsed by the Petersburg City Council as part of the city's 2020 legislative agenda. I do have here with me both the city manager, the mayor, city councilman, and members of the administrative team.
Who's running the city today? Thank you. Questions for the paper? Delegate Poindexter.
I noticed this 5% here on line 26. I mean,
Sorry, could you repeat the line number?
line 26.
Okay.
It would appear to be doubling down. I mean, you're putting an extra 5% against the owner of blighted property who's already struggling. That makes it even more difficult for that landowner.
You said that they're already struggling, but it's their property and they are not tending to it.
I understand that too, but you're approaching enforcement through financial means. And to me, that just sort of hurts the landlord that might be trying to fix the property. That's all I'm saying.
I think that there are, and the city can correct me, but I believe that there are many efforts in place right now that would allow the city to make many efforts to communicate with the landowner in an attempt of good faith to have them address the needs of the property. And in many of these circumstances, this is after numerous attempts to have them bring their property into good standing. And this gives them a tool to utilize for those landowners that are not willing to communicate and respond and have made no effort towards addressing their blighted property. But the city can confirm that if I'm incorrect.
Other questions for the paper? Delegate McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who determines that it's a blighted property? Is it the assessor?
I do believe so. Is that correct?
Actually, it's through our code. I'm the city manager for the city of Petersburg, Aretha for Benavides. Our code department has been working with our building inspector to look at the buildings, and as they mentioned, we go through a numerous process to try to catch them early on and start repairs, but in many cases, as you mentioned, they're absentee landlords. In most cases, we find that they don't even live in the state of Virginia. They purchase this as an investment property and walk away from it. And so our hands have been really tied in trying to bring these up to code and standard.
Chair Watts.
Thank you. I'll follow up on that question. Therefore, I assume that as the bill reads, you are still tying it to the code definition of blighted properties, as you've got it on line 18 and
Yes.
46, 47, you still?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you.
Delegate O'Rourke.
Follow-up question to the manager. But are we also not talking about properties that potentially were a family homestead? They have passed away and now it's tied up among the heirs. And they may not have the resources to keep the property up yet because of sentimental reasons or other ones. Would this not also in that circumstance, where they've got to either pay up more taxes or get shed of it or something? I mean, candidly, this is meant to be a stick to try and move some of these properties out of their current status into auction, hopefully have a new owner that would then develop them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Our goal is to really redevelop it. Because many of these houses are historical properties, the longer we wait, we find that it becomes more and more difficult to do the necessary repairs. And sometimes they are hung up in wills and testaments, but we do want to make sure that this happens as quickly as possible so that we can revitalize our community.
And if I can just add, and I don't have the code definition of the derelict structure in front of me, but we are talking about a lot of structures that are largely inhabitable. I mean, these are not your properties that you are going to, in a number of circumstances, these are not your properties that you're hoping to make a fortune from because you're going to move families into. These are properties that have been left unkept for substantial periods of time and are in really poor condition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, I pulled up the definition of derelict structures here in 36-152. It says derelict structures means residential, commercial, or industrial structures which are no longer being used for a place of habitation, business, or industry, and which are in such poor condition as to cause a blight upon the neighborhood in which any such structure is located. So this would not affect any property that is still being used for habitation, and I believe would create an incentive for, in Delegate Orrick's example, for the interested parties to come together and come to a resolution more quickly, so the condition doesn't continue to deteriorate.
Other questions for the paper? All right, hearing none. All those in support of the bill?
Yes, Chairman, here to members of the House Subcommittee, I am Sam Pam, Mayor of the City of Petersburg, and I'm here to speak in support of HB 755.
Yes, sir.
We have a cancer that's going on throughout the city of Petersburg, and it's affecting every ward other than one ward out of 7 in the city of Petersburg. And what's happening is we've had so many people that have bought structures in the city of Petersburg coming out of the financial crisis because they felt like it's an investment property or something that they want to get to when things pick up. And it's been, we coming up on over 10 years now, since 2008, and these structures is really, is stopping the progress of the city of Petersburg. And we have various developers that's interested in creating better housing opportunities throughout the city, and they have kind of been snuffed out because of these blighted properties that are well documented, whether it's on the news, in the newspaper, you see it all the time. And please, we ask for your support. This was endorsed by the Petersburg City Council, and we ask for your support here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Chairman Harry Pick, if I may, I'm the city attorney for the city of Petersburg.
Yes, sir.
I've been in local government for quite some time. I grew up in the city of Portsmouth. I was a police officer in the city of Hampton, Delegate Mugler, and I would say that in almost 30 years of local government practice, I can tell you that these blighted properties wreak havoc on localities. They cause us to expend extensive money on additional services. Those properties are a harbinger for homeless people living in them, for dangers to children playing in the neighborhood, and so we have to spend additional money on services to facilitate having those blighted structures in our locality. So the enhanced tax, the idea behind it is simply to offset the amount of money we spend in dealing with these blighted properties. The city of Petersburg has nearly 200 of these blighted properties, and we're already strapped significantly for funds. And so the idea that, and it's modeled on what DC has successfully done in addressing blighted properties, is to encourage property owners to abate these nuisances. And if they don't, then give us the opportunity to spend our own money on it and recover our money more quickly. Right now, the quickest we can get our money back is 1 year. And in honesty, it takes an additional 3 months to go through the process to actually get that through the courts. And so we're waiting 15 months if we spend money to abate these problems to even get our money back so we can clear up the next problem. And so all we're asking is, one, that you give us this tool to offset this additional services, the money and services we have to spend, but two, give us the ability to recoup our money that we spend in abatement more quickly.
Thank you. Anyone else in support of the bill? Yes, sir.
I'm in support of the bill, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee. I implore you to adopt this particular bill. This particular bill will take care of certain issues with respect to persons who are homeowners who are disenfranchised based on the same level of tax payments for the same property, where their property, the equity in their property is diminished based on these derelict properties. So I ask you to support it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in support? Any opposed? Hearing none, Delegate Ayers, last word.
Last word is I think that this will give the city an additional tool to try and address this extreme need that we are experiencing, and I hope it will be the pleasure of the committee to support the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Ayers. All right, is there a motion on the bill?
Move to report.
Second.
The motion is to report and second. All right, let's put our votes. All right. Close the roll. Delegate Ayers reported 5-4.
I thank the committee.
All right. Delegate Davis, Delegate Cole.
So, House Bill 1679, House Bill 1679. So this bill is just to clean up an issue that right now we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that is whether or not a Commissioner of Revenue's office has to determine residency of someone applying for a business license in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So what this does is clarifies it that when a person provides a federal employer identification number, which is garnered from the IRS, plus a valid passport to a locality, they do not need to provide a social security number, as many people may not have one, and that the locality is not required to determine residency status of the applicant. What's happening is some localities believe they do because of an old opinion. Some don't see it the same way, so we have people going to different localities looking, trying to get a business license. This streamlines it and says, as long as you have the EIN from the IRS and they deem it appropriate for you to have a business, because that's what an EIN is for, and a passport, then they can get a business license issued.
Question, Pedro? You're gonna do the substitute.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, sir, yeah, that's right, which is why I'm saying something that's not on this right now. Yes, please, do the substitute.
That's two substitutes. All right.
Reference to a passport.
I apologize, yeah.
Hey, it's early.
It is.
There we go.
Started at 6:30 this morning, you know.
That's right.
Got it. Delegate Davis.
Yes, sir.
Under question.
Yes, sir.
Pursuant to the substitute, it says has been issued a federal employer identification number and provides that number and a valid passport.
Yes, sir.
Does it require both?
Yes, sir. So, well, you have to have the FEIN because that's what identifies the business to begin with.
Right.
And in lieu of a social security number and anything else, you show them the passport. So there has to be some type of document. The FEIN, if you give them the FEIN application, it has all your information on there, but we're not going to require the FEIN application, so just a passport. And that's what some localities have already been doing, and it works out wonderfully. This actually came at a request from 3 individuals. Actually, interesting, all 3 are from El Salvador. Came here when they were young, had their own businesses, had some of the family members come over, and this is what they had requested. They'd be up here today, but business kind of got in the way.
All right, I see it now. Thank you. Okay. All right, other questions for the patron? Or is there a motion on substitute? I'm sorry, Delegate Butler.
Question for the paper. If they provide, and we have a commissioner in the room, I noticed, but if they provide a passport and the EIN, many businesses, such as restaurants, they go after personally in order to collect, fiduciary taxes that have not been paid and so forth. Does the passport give the identification that is necessary to go after them personally?
We do have a couple of commissioners here. Mine specifically might be able to answer.
We have an inconsistency throughout. My name is Phil Kellum, Commissioner Revenue from Virginia Beach. We have an inconsistency among my association on how this is administered. There is some concern that, well, let me phrase it this way. This bill will create a consistency that we feel that will not encumber our ability unreasonably to collect. And the treasurers may have some input on this as well, but I've polled the folks in my association over the last 2 days, and we're taking a watch approach. I will say that Delegate Davis did reach out to me last fall on this issue, and I've sought an opinion from the Attorney General on this, but it's certainly the prerogative of members to make a decision, and our association is pretty much neutral. We can work with what you do, and I applaud Delegate Davis for seeking a consistency on this that would pretty much guide us on how you would like us to deal with this.
Delegate Orr.
Yeah. Sir, if may, from your perspective, is there a problem, a true problem this would address?
I think so. I think that yes, sir.
Thank you.
And if I may just answer the other delegate's question quickly, this is not in lieu of an application, so the Commissioner of Revenue's office still has an application which will require the person to list their contact, the business information, their personal information. This is just from an ID status. That's where this falls in place.
Okay.
Chair Watt.
Question as I try to understand this, is Tax Department Councilman, is a taxpayer ID number issued without a social security number?
They're issued by the Joe Mayer for the
Federal.
Department of Taxation. The IRS does that. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm looking, it's an SS4 form, I'm looking it up right now, I don't think it does.
So if I may answer the question, I know it does, because I know this is why this application's here, because I know individuals that have an EIN, they do not have a social, and they can go to one city, get their business license, another city kind of questions whether they have to determine residency. So that's the problem this is fixing, because there are individuals with an EIN without a social security number. That truly is the issue we're having today.
All right, thank you. Delegate Orr.
Which to me begs the question, so if they're generating income, how are they exempt from being a part of the social security system?
Good question. Right now, they wanna pay taxes and they can't pay they're getting the money, they want, at the federal system, if they're not paying into Social Security, they need to fix that the federal side. All we're doing is at the local side, is giving them that avenue to pay local taxes, because the feds are giving them an EIN and saying, here's your number to pay federal taxes. They wanna be able to pay local taxes.
Chair Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now my mind's going. There was a time when it was talked about all of this information being shared between the localities and between the state tax department, so that if you did file for a BPOL license, that information, and it was done on an EIN, would then be conveyed to tax as they then look at whether or not you have a tax liability under income or business taxes. Would that in fact happen? Question.
Doug Carter, question.
Mr. Chairman, I have a response to Delegate Orrick's question.
Okay.
If I may. Mr. Chairman, Delegate Orrick, for those individuals who do not have a Social Security number, but do have an EIN for the business, as an individual, they would likely also have an individual taxpayer identification number. So that individual would most likely be paying into Social Security, but would likely not be eligible to receive benefits when they reach retirement age. So, you know, I would advocate federally for them to change that, so those folks would be eligible for benefits if they've been paying in. But if the delegate's concerned that these folks might not be paying into Social Security, I would assure him that they likely are.
Okay, any other questions? Delegate Hudson.
Is it possible that the passport is really belt and suspenders and we could do with just the federal identification number? Are we maybe writing into state law something that is an ad hoc practice?
Delegate, I would say that just giving the EIN number doesn't associate maybe someone with that EIN. This came from from the Latino community. We're back home, and they said, Glenn, we've all got passports, and some localities they've had not had an issue, others they've had an issue. The big issue really that we're solving with this is that last sentence down at the bottom, the requirement to determine residency. That's the issue we're really getting at here. Some localities do allow the passport and the EIN. Some have been looking for the Social Security to determine residency based on a prior AG opinion. So this kind of gets at the inconsistency, as the commissioner put it, that they don't have to determine residency, i.e. no social, but they do want some type of ID, and I've had no one that said, I have a problem with that. So.
And just to follow up, would any kind of photo identification be sufficient?
I would say yes, but what they've asked for is the passport, because if they're here, they have a passport. If you could say any type of photo ID we get into, well, maybe not the library card, but how about this, or, you know, the one consistency that I understand from this community is passports are fine. Just don't ask for a driver's license, don't ask for something else, but we've all got passports, and we may not have Social Security numbers, so.
All right. If there are no other questions, I need a motion on subject.
Chairman, I share the concern that was just expressed and do not know why that valid passport to the locality is required. Either you have a Social Security number or you have an EIN.
I would turn to my commissioner and whether an ID is helpful or not helpful.
It is. We want as much help as we can get to make sure that if there is a collection need, you know, like the president may want to talk to this, but we like the bill as it's written right now, but I'm a bit agnostic about it. We'll work with what you tell us to do. I know that you're asking for me to tell you what we want, but we're pretty much putting it back on you.
Mr. Chairman, quick question. How do you use the passport to collect?
It's a proof of identification, a declaration of identification that, you know, the EIN number is, we're just trying to identify them for our own purpose.
So that, it's follow-up question, so that you can properly build them rather than build the business?
The establishment. Yes, it's an additional, it's a tether, if you will, an additional tether. It's better than a library card. so to speak.
And if I may also add, help with this, so I can go onto the state website and in 3 seconds get the EIN, or I guess federal website, and pull EINs of a lot of big companies. And I can say I'm the CEO of a lot of those big companies. I can walk into the commissioner's office and get a business license to do business in that area under that name, saying I'm the CEO of the company, absent an ID. And so without a social security card or social security number, the one thing that everyone can have in common is they can still have that valid passport. And so that would be the purpose. Otherwise, you could just have anyone grab an EIN.
Chair Watts.
I'm going to move and then speak to the motion. I'm going to move that we strike the language, after, on line 13, after that number, strike all the rest of the language.
Ms. Laura, do we need to adopt the substitute before we can amend it? All right, let's do that.
I think so.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt the substitute? All right, is there a second?
Clarification, I'm trying to figure out what we're striking.
Okay,
Sorry.
and now-
Maybe I have a different line 13.
Let's
maybe.
vote on the
Please,
substitute.
second it.
Well, I'm trying to get it. What is it?
Is there a second on the motion to adopt the substitute?
Okay, so
All
I'm
right,
good.
all in favor of adopting the substitute?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, speaking to the substitute.
Is this motion debatable?
Okay, now,
To adopt the substitute?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, question for the patron on the substitute.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Davis. There seems to be some heartache on this substitute language about limiting it to a single form of photo identification. I believe that the purpose of the substitute is so there is some form of identification so that people can't just copy and paste an EIN that they found in publicly available documents. However, it seems that there's a little bit of heartache on restricting it to a single type of identification. So would the patron be amenable to perhaps revisiting the substitute language in full committee with a more extensive list of permissible identification documents?
Chairman, Delegate, I would say definitely. I think, and I think Delegate Watts has a amendment to the substitute, but I would definitely, if it's the pleasure of this body, be fine with moving the substitute as it is today, getting in this good form, getting it to full, and before full, revisiting that with who members would like to, just on what IDs may work.
Delegate Orr.
Mr. Chairman, I guess my question speaks to if we don't adopt the substitute, we go back to the language of the original bill that has the effect of what adopting it and then amending it to Chairman Watts' procedure would be. So I'm thinking we may be in a better posture to not adopt the substitute and give the patron time to work with the chairman of the full committee with some language between now and full committee time.
speaking to the motion to adopt the substitute.
Madam Chair.
Speaking to that motion, here is my concern. I know from some of the experiences that I've had that a social security number, that social security does not look behind multiple social security numbers, that they can be issued to 2, 3, 4 people. So it is not a particularly secure way of identification. The EIN perhaps is more unique as far as each employer, and that you have with the EIN then a direct connection between tax, which is what this is all about, and the revenue of the business, so that I'm looking at this as being a far in advance to just say EIN, and I'm not, for the life of me, sure why we need to have additional identification beyond that. So if we could work on that and make sure that we're addressing these concerns.
Delegate Hudson.
Mr. Chair, speaking to the motion, if I understood the patron correctly, there's also in the substitute the affirmative language that the locality is not required to determine the residency status of the applicant. It was my understanding that that is part of the problem they're trying to solve because there's confusion on that by the localities.
If I may say just briefly, Mr. Chairman, that delegation, that's exactly one of the major issues of this whole thing that's tied up some localities already. I definitely appreciate Delegate Rock's comments. Very well taken. But if it pleases this body, if we can move the substitute and then come back and amend from this language, and that was actually the reason why we do have this here was actually at the request of LAS with the way the initial one got worded, but it keeps the second language and then we can pull the middle part out if need be.
All right, going back, the motion is then to adopt the substitutes but duly seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No. All right, I think the noes have it. The substitute is defeated. Back to the original bill. All right, in that posture, are there questions for the patron on the original bill? All right, hearing none, is there a motion on the original bill?
Move to report.
The motion is to report. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All right. All right, Delegate Davis, the bill is reported sorry, to Delegate Butler.
Sorry.
All right, close the roll. Bill is reported 9-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have House Bill 1575. It was requested by one of our localities, and I do have a line amendment to make to it. On line 13, there's two 100,000s, and I would like to make each of those 200,000. And what the bill does, it deals with the merchant capital tax. Merchant capital is a tax your locality can impose if they do not impose a B-poll tax. So if your locality imposes B-poll, they do not impose a merchant capital tax. And what this is seeking to do is seeking to carve out a separate classification within the merchant capital tax for a retailer that has at least, with the amendment, it would be 200,000 square feet of a warehouse or property to again be able to carve out a separate tax rate for that.
All right. All right, so Delegate Cole has a floor amendment to amend 100,000 in line 13 to 200,000. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, before we do it, so Mark, my concern would be, is there anyone currently under the wholesale provision that would be subject to this, that by now the increased square footage would not be subject? Because right now we're saying a wholesale only has to have 100,000 square feet. That would now go up to 200,000. And a smaller wholesale facility would now no longer be.
All right, and the Commissioner of Revenue from Stafford here will
Yeah,
speak on that.
I apologize for the confusion on that. The intent was just to go to 200,000 on the retail side, because we've got Walmarts and Lowe's that are over 100,000 square feet, and the intent is not to have a carve out for those facilities. So we'd like to keep the wholesalers at 100,000. I apologize for that.
All right, well, forget that amendment.
But we still need it on the retail.
We'll have to probably do a substitute.
Okay.
Yeah.
This amendment ain't ready.
No, it's not ready.
All right, I'm sorry, trying to catch up with a little business here.
All right, we're gonna have to work, yeah.
Are you requesting the amendment or?
No, I'm not requesting
All
the
right.
amendment now.
Then there will be, okay.
All right.
Yes, we do. All right, Delegate Cole, questions for the delegate on the bill?
I think the bill needs more work, and I would ask that you pass by for the day.
All right, the motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, the motion is gleefully passed by.
Gleefully.
Gleefully. All right, now I've got 3 bills. Delegate Weber has a bill.
Weber's not here.
Delegate Weber here?
He's under sub right now.
All right, are you, is that?
Yeah.
All right, how close is he to finishing?
It said they were on their last bill and the other sub.
Yeah, famous last words.
I know.
Okay, all right.
Yours are pretty quick.
Well, yeah. Delegate Murphy, you have a minute to take over the chair while I present my bill.
Or I've got right next door to go.
Okay.
You lost Vivian too.
Well, she's over sharing something on the other side, so we can get her back. All right.
He's on his way now.
Yay. All right, go ahead.
Well, No, I'm not leaving until Rep comes back in this room, so you have a quorum.
No, Vivian comes back.
Either way.
Yeah, all right.
You want a quorum? I'm standing here.
It's a standing quorum.
All right, there we go. All right, thank you, Delegate Murphy. All right. For those of you who've been waiting patiently on behalf of the treasurers for my bills, just please be advised that I've tried to take all the other members first because there are a lot of stuff going on this morning and I don't want to delay others more than they have to be. Madam Chair, can we take up 1581? You have the gavel.
Thank you. All right, I have the gavel.
You have the time, Mr.
And now I just need to have the bill in front of me. If you'll wait just one second. Thank you. Delegate Herrick, 1581, would you like to present?
Madam Chair, 1581 comes at the request of the Treasurers Association, which is essentially a technical amendment which doesn't currently change actually de facto policy. This would correct two obsolete statutory references that go back to the time when delinquent taxes are recorded and maintained by the clerk of the circuit court. Clerks no longer do that. Currently, the treasurer is the local official who has the statutory responsibility to maintain records of delinquent taxes, to make appropriate entries, etc. And this bill would eliminate the outdated references to the clerk and replace them with a reference to the treasurer. That is the limited purpose of the bill.
Any questions of the patron?
Have a motion.
Anyone speak, if anyone here to speak for, please stand up.
Madam Chair, Alan Elmer on behalf of the Treasurers Association, it's our bill. We don't think it changes anything except fixes the code.
Anyone speak against? Motion's in order. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please indicate on the electronic voting card. The HB 1581 is recommended for reporting 8-0.
Madam Chair,
Delegate Berrigan.
thank you, Madam Chair. 1582 is an additional bill brought by the request of the Treasurers Association. And by way of background, the statutory authority for the non-judicial sale of tax delinquent property was enacted in 2004 to provide a cost-effective alternative to the full judicial sale process, otherwise set out in the code. The full judicial process is still utilized, unfortunately, by the vast majority of localities in tax delinquent sales. And unfortunately, it's quite expensive by virtue of the need for legal notices, fees, and other ancillary costs, attorneys being the creatures that we are. And then using that process, particularly with respect to minimal value property, sometimes requires a locality to actually spend more than they can recover in the sale. This particular bill would simply raise the this particular bill will slightly expand the range of properties that are eligible to be sold through the non-judicial process in order to make it more useful as a means of clearing title and returning the properties to taxable status. The change in value under this bill would eliminate the word unimproved and would change the value limit for non-judicial sales to $25,000. It would change the maximum size of the parcel for non-judicial sales to 1 acre and corrects an erroneous reference, technically a reference to the word impleading in subsection J to the word interpleading, which is the correct legal term to apply in this process.
Any questions on page?
I never understood it either.
Every law student gets that confused.
Civil procedure.
Impleading, interpleading, you know.
Lawyers.
That's why you gotta see a civil procedure.
Are there any questions of the patron by committee members? Anyone speaking in favor? Yes, I'm sorry.
Not a
Delegate.
question of the patron, but if we get the
Anyone
advocate.
speaking in favor of the bill?
This is the Treasurers Association bill, Madam Chair, and I'm very happy to address it. If you have technical questions, I have not one, not two, but 3 lawyers here who actually know these sales
Hopefully getting
and do
paid by
these
the hour.
sales. So you can have me or the lawyers, that's your pick.
Well, Madam Chair, my question speaks to, I understand the intent, but this is a major policy shift. Because now we're bringing any type of improvement on the property. So I can't imagine any parcel that isn't gonna meet this threshold with almost any structure now. And secondly, it's changing from the unimproved acreage was roughly 1/10 of an acre, now it goes to a full acre. So we're exposing a whole lot more properties to these auctions.
It is possible, Delegate Orrock, it is possible that you typically, what you're gonna have, because this is a non-judicial sale, you're not using it for, a property that has any serious improvement. The reason for removing that unimproved word was that there've been technical issues raised. I'll give you an example. If you've got an old abandoned, acreage that has a fallen down barn on it, I mean, technically, that is still an improved parcel. So that's the rationale. Not trying